Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Hello world, you're listening to Strategikon, the podcast of Sage International Australia, or SIA, your window to all things security and foreign affairs.
Sustained incumbency is certainly not the point of seeking office, and there are times when we must risk our careers in favor of our principles. Now is such a time. We must stop pretending that the degradation of our politics and the conduct of some in our executive branch are normal. They are not normal. Reckless, outrageous, and undignified behavior has become excused and countenanced as telling it like it is, when it is actually just reckless, outrageous, and undignified. When a leader correctly identifies real hurt and insecurity in our country and instead of addressing it goes to look for someone to blame, there is perhaps nothing more devastating to a pluralistic society. We have fooled ourselves for long enough that a pivot to governing is right around the corner. We know better than that. When the next generation asks us, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you speak up? What are we going to say? Mr. President, I rise today to say enough. I have children and grandchildren to answer to, and so, Mr. President, I will not be complicit or silent.
And that was Arizona Senator Jeffrey Flake giving his resignation speech on the floor of the US Senate. It is perhaps fitting that today's episode, our Halloween special, is focused on events across the Pacific in the United States. One of the most frightening developments for all American allies, including Australia, is what is happening in Washington, D.C. We are indeed in uncharted waters with the incumbency of President Donald J. Trump. His administration has so far redefined the United States in the eyes of the world. It has also redefined what the Republican Party is becoming within the United States. No longer the bastion of traditional conservative American pragmatism, the Republican Party is hemorrhaging. Those who considered themselves ideologically moderates, who shared the post-World War II vision of the United States being the international light on the hill, are being shunted aside in favor of Trump loyalists. The war within the grand old party between Trumpists and those who stand opposed to the president is getting worse and threatens to destroy the Republican Party entirely, or perhaps more properly, destroy the long-standing traditions and spirit of what the Republican Party stood for. But of course, this was Trump's intention all along. Not being a professional politician, Trump was elected by people who were in many ways justifiably angry at their elected representatives governing for established interests and for the benefit of lobbyists, leaving the average voter to fend for themselves. And in an America where employment opportunities were becoming scarce, where all politicians were perceived as corrupted in some way, where wars for exporting democracy failed catastrophically, where race relations were becoming problematic, and where the Pyrrhic victory of having won the Cold War failed to sustain the positive effects of American international leadership, a bitter, twisted, and disappointed American people rebelled. Not in the usual manner of rebellion through the violent removal of the political leadership, but being lulled by the siren song of a man with a plan, that man being Donald J. Trump. While the above observation may well be considered false in the eyes of some American commentators and electors, the establishment, also known as the swamp, needed a shaking up. It needed to be reminded that it held its power and privilege at the sufferance of the people. It needed a swamp monster. The result? A party at war with itself, a national political leadership seen as largely incoherent and antagonistic, An America that is becoming less generous as a force for good in the world, and one that shows no enduring loyalty to countries whose support and forbearance was critical for the United States to sustain its global superpower status. So today we are happy to have back on Strategikon Dr. Jonathan Z. Ludwig, our resident Russian expert and observer of American politics. Good to have you back, Jonathan.
Thank you, John. It's great to be back on Halloween in Australia and what we like to call here in America, Indictment Monday.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so as we go to air, news from the American Capitol is that former Trump 2016 campaign manager Paul Manafort and his deputy Rick Gates have been indicted and are under house arrest. The Mueller probe into Trump Russia seems to be taking scalps, but has it done any significant damage to the US president?
With Manafort and Gates, as of today, I would say no. What they were indicted for, as the indictment starts off by saying, was for activities that ran through 2006 to 2015, including money laundering that went on through 2016. But most of this was work that they did for the Ukrainian government, Yanukovych, the pro-Putin government in Ukraine. So I don't think that touches Trump at all, directly at all, as the White House made a big deal of saying. It does do some other things, though, right? What I've heard is they'll be under house arrest rather than just having their passports taken away from them, which is normal in this situation. Manafort will have to put down a $10 million, and Gates $5 million, in lieu of prison. And my guess is this is to put pressure both on them and more for anybody else who may be coming up the pipeline later, in that, this is what could happen to you. You may sit around having to forfeit this much money, sit around in your house for 6 months, a year, 2 years until this plays out. Is that really what you want to have happen to you? There's probably some attempt to put pressure on Manafort and Gates to say anything they know about the Trump campaign, any Trump campaign illegalities now. Because let's face it, they've been indicted on 12 counts, including conspiracy, which is sort of a catch-all, rather vague indictment, to being an unregistered foreign agent, making false and misleading statements, and failing to file appropriate financial accounts, basically tax fraud. Manafort, 68, he would probably spend the rest of his life. Any sentence would almost certainly be a life sentence for him. Gates was not indicted on all the counts, best as I could tell. He might see some light at the tunnel, but there'll certainly be a lot more light if they speak up. What I think the Trump administration has to worry about a lot more is George Papadopoulos pleading guilty to lying to federal officials. He pled guilty today. It's separate from the Manafort-Gates indictment, but that was specifically for things he did during the campaign. Namely, he was asked questions about meeting with the Russians. He gave false answers. He pled guilty to that. The Trump administration is trying to say, he was a volunteer. He wasn't very important. But he was a foreign policy advisor. He was in touch with high-level advisors. I believe he was there about the same time that Manafort spent those few months in charge of the campaign. And there was a fairly damning footnote in his indictment that he pled guilty to today. Something about being the conduit between setting up meetings with the Russians, but not quote-unquote DT. They would try to send some lower-ranked officials to not give the wrong impression. So I think that's the one that Trump needs to be concerned about. I believe he pled guilty, no sentence yet, and my guess his sentencing would be pending what information he has, what he's willing to share.
Arizona's Senator Jeff Flake's speech last Tuesday will probably go down as one of the most eloquent given by a US senator this year. It was poignant and reflective, and, at least to himself and those who want to disown the Trump presidency and their role in supporting the current administration, a reminder of how dangerously divided American politics has become. Was his decision last Tuesday not to rerun for office in 2018 based on a reality that he would be defeated, as Steve Bannon claimed, or was it a genuine sign that some Republicans are prepared to do the right thing and walk away from Trump?
I think it's a little bit of both. Not being reelected was a real possibility. I think the bigger possibility is he might not have even won the Republican primary. Right? This has happened to some other big-name senators in previous years. Richard Lugar in Indiana comes to mind, I believe, about almost 6 years ago now. But in 2012, he won the election in Arizona with a plurality, not a majority of the votes. He only had 49%. The Democrat had 46%. There was a Libertarian candidate with close to 5%. So you still have above 50% with this sort of conservative Libertarian tradition of, say, a Barry Goldwater, but it was still split. That leaves room for a Democrat to sneak up there. It's becoming increasingly Democratic state as it becomes more Hispanic, as the Republicans mishandle immigration issues again and again and again. There was also a Republican challenger to the nearly invincible Senator McCain, just this last election cycle. McCain only got 51% of the vote, and Flake does not have McCain's personal story or history in national politics. From that point of view, it's always nice to go out on your own terms, to decide to step down. It also gives you the freedom to say what you want. Now, something I just learned is that, at least as of the giving of the speech, he was pretty much done with the Senate, but he's been approached by some independent groups who asked him if he'd be interested in running as an independent. And I believe this happened when Senator Lieberman in Connecticut lost a primary. So it's not unheard of for someone to come back like this. He hasn't said yes, definitely, but he's given them permission to go out and look, to do some polling and see if it would be viable. That would be a very interesting race with a very right-wing Republican. Flake, who himself is more traditionally conservative, whatever the Democrats put up, and if there's still a libertarian in the mix, somebody could win that race with 25% of the vote.
So, Jonathan, with regard to Senator Flake's resignation speech, as eloquent as it was, how much of that speech and its content do you think he really believed in?
I think my understanding is he wrote it completely himself. It was not a speech that his staff wrote for him. I haven't followed Senator Flake's career that much. It usually takes a term for people, to really get my attention there. But you have to remember, there are actually people in this world, even in politics, who believe in disagreeing without being disagreeable. There are politicians who have deeply and dearly held beliefs and actually a conscience. And I think Senator Flake is probably one of those people. He believes in what he believes. I know there are a lot of Democrats being disingenuous, and I'll go back to the speech in a second, where the day after he gave that speech, he voted with the Republicans on something else because, they weren't willing to understand that, Flake voted for one thing because he believed it. He gave this speech. He's doing what he's doing because he believes it. Earlier this year, he wrote a book called Conscience of a Conservative, borrowing Barry Goldwater's book title from, I think, the 1960s or 1970s, right? Barry Goldwater's an Arizona icon. There's sort of a path from Barry Goldwater, to Reagan in the modern political party before Trump has blown it up there. My understanding is he wrote it entirely on his own. He kept it secret from everyone. He may have told his wife, he may have told his family. He did not tell his staff. When he had it done, his staff begged him not to write it. They said it would end his political career. He did it anyway. If he didn't believe this, I find it hard to believe he'd write a book that put, in everybody else's mind, his political career, in jeopardy. I will add, the day after his speech, the book just skyrocketed on the Amazon list and other people and other places.
So how will this leave those associated with Trump at the cabinet level? I know I've spoken to you about this over the past few months, but is there nobility in being the last one to turn out the lights on an administration that seems so antithetical to what the American founding fathers envisaged? I mean, what do the more credible figures such as Mattis, McMaster and Tillerson hope to gain by hanging tight when their boss has shown himself to be such a loose cannon?
With the two military members, I think it's a sense of responsibility and duty to country. I'll come back to more information on Mattis in a second. With McMaster, as I think we've discussed before, even though he's National Security Advisor, he's still active military. He probably sees this as part of his job right now. Tillerson, I'm willing to not go out on a very big limb and said he probably really did call Trump a moron. That's why he had to go out and give a press conference saying that he didn't and why he was sat down by Vice President Pence, etc. My guess is, if for no other reason, he'll stay out of spite, forcing Trump's hand, also knowing that, Senator Flake, gave the very impassioned speech. Senator Corker's taken a different road to dealing with Trump, being more in a Twitter war. Senator Corker's in charge of the Foreign Relations Committee, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. Any new Secretary of State would need to be approved by that committee, and Corker could single-handedly delay it, stop it, or veto a candidate. So I think this actually gives Tillerson a lot of power, puts Trump in a rather weak position. Because while it's okay to have people floating around certain offices as sort of ad hoc members, temporary members, you don't want that in a Secretary of State because foreign countries have no idea what your policy is going to be. Not that they maybe do right now.
Oh, I don't think they do. Yeah.
But with Mattis, Mattis, I think, again, it's his military background. I think he just deeply believes in America. And, well, he gave a speech before a lot of the recent things have blown up. I believe it was in Qatar talking to troops about holding the line. And he noted, our country right now, it's got problems we don't have in the military. You just hold the line until our country gets back to understanding and respecting each other and showing it. We've got the power of intimidation, and that's you. If someone wants to screw with our families, our countries, our allies, that's you. The power of inspiration, we'll get the power of inspiration back.
Sounds like a real patriot, Jonathan.
I think it is. I mean, he's career military. I think part of it's patriotism, part of it is he actually believes that, and part of it, he wants to stay to keep the world from ending or Trump from ending the world. I mean, I think this is probably in the back of his head. If Trump decides one day he wants to deal with North Korea with nuclear weapons, Mattis might be the one person who's able to stand up and say no, or to simply order his troops to ignore the orders of the president and risk getting in trouble himself, but putting his troops, in more safety. So I think it's patriotism. I think it's, he knows he's the one person with, sort of gravitas who can stand that line between Trump and the defense, the defense, the Army, the Navy, etc.
The problem with the flight of moderate Republicans leaves the party open to the risk that they will be replaced by Trump loyalists who will not act as any sort of internal check or balance on their commander-in-chief. Would this be a correct assertion?
It'd be a correct assertion that if there are no moderate Republicans left, then you're basically going to have people who are rubber stamping Trump. But it's also not a certainty that these Republicans would get elected if moderate Republicans step down. Look at Arizona. If Flake doesn't run, in Nevada, Dean Heller is not favored to win. If Flake does not run as an independent, I would put the odds more with the Democrats winning those two seats. Now, it may be a bit of a wash because Joe Manchin, a nominal Democrat in West Virginia, is likely to lose, so that's sort of a toss-up. But let's go back. I believe it's now been 4 years in election cycle, so about 5 in real time. Republicans nominated Todd Akin in Missouri and Richard Murdoch in Indiana. Murdoch beat Senator Lugar. I forget how Akin won. These were races that were theirs to lose, and they managed to lose them spectacularly. Akin talked about quote-unquote legitimate rape. Murdoch had something along those lines to say, to where even in states, I know that Indiana the second time went for Romney over Obama, so even in a state that trends Republican, they were not going to vote for him. So if Flake was going to lose, I forget which Republican was thinking of running, not the same one who, ran against McCain, but there's no guarantee that that person would win a general election. If, Senate Leader McConnell, there was that little love fest in the Rose Garden, I think it's been about 2 weeks ago now. People have been saying Trump and McConnell weren't getting along, so Trump called him over to say, tell everybody we like each other. And McConnell there said, look, the goal here is to win elections in November. Back in 2010 and 2012, we nominated several candidates, Christine O'Donnell, Sharon Angle, Todd Akin, Richard Murdoch. They're not in the Senate. And the reason for that was that they were not able to appeal to a broader electorate in the general election. My goal as leader of the Republican Party in the Senate is to keep us in the majority. The way you do that is not complicated. You have to nominate people who can actually win, because winners make policy and losers go home. We changed the business model in 2014. We nominated people who could win everywhere. These people that Bannon wants to run, these people that Trump says he wants to run, otherwise really don't think he has an understanding of how all this works, are not people who could win general elections outside of a limited number of states.
Jonathan, what sort of pressure did Senator Bob Corker put on Trump through his recent Twitter war with the US president? Do things like this have any real effect on the White House, or is this just puerile grandstanding on social media?
I don't think it had any effect in the long run. Since Corker then said he was going to leave at the end of his term, like Flake is, they're probably just sitting back thinking they can bide their time. It doesn't matter. I think Corker in that case would have been better spent doing something like Flake did, made an impassioned argument, rather than getting the Twitter war of saying, looks like White House child care, failed to do their job this morning. I don't think neither side, Trump never looks good on Twitter. Corker is in general a more thoughtful man than that, and yeah, I think he should have stepped back and handled it a different way.
Yeah, definitely. Since Steve Bannon resigned from the White House, Jonathan, he's freed himself from the shackles of office only to attack Trump's doubters in the GOP. Highest on Bannon's hit list is Senator Mitch McConnell, who is insufficiently loyal to Trump and his political agenda. By letting Bannon go, Trump has facilitated Bannon's talent for conducting guerrilla war from the trenches of the right-wing Breitbart News network. How do you think this high-profile war will end? Will McConnell cave, or can he marshal enough of the GOP base to resist Bannon's sniping?
I'm not sure exactly what Bannon's endgame is. Bannon, in an interview that he later claimed he didn't actually give, said, "I'm a Leninist. Lenin wanted to destroy the state, and that's my goal too. I want to bring everything crashing down and destroy all of today's establishment." The people he's going after, like Steve Barrasso in Wyoming, Deb Fischer in Nebraska, these are some, they vote fairly conservatively, but they're more of the thoughtful, moderate people. Maybe Bannon sees himself as a Leninist because Lenin, and we could talk about this in a future podcast, right, had basically no supporters. It was a handful of people that would probably fit in one of our rooms. And he took over an entire country. I don't think Bannon's going to be that successful, in large part because Lenin was dealing with a completely different media structure, propaganda structure, etc. McConnell, I think McConnell will do what McConnell wants to do, right? He did it during Obama. McConnell will continue to wave the Justice Gorsuch flag. If not for me, Obama would have had an appointee, and I think that will go a long ways with the electorate. Senators, House members are used to being pushed around. I remember reading something by a foreign diplomat being briefed on, the U.S. government structure says the House, they really don't matter. You need to know 3 or 4 of them. Otherwise, they're just interchangeable and useless. But the Senate, each and every one is important because anybody can stop things.
We'll take a short break here. You are listening to Strategikon, the podcast of SIA.
I was working in the lab late one night when my eyes beheld an eerie sight. For my monster from his slab began to rise, and suddenly, to my surprise, he did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. He did the monster mash from my laboratory in the castle east to the master bedroom where the vampires feast. The ghouls all came from their humble abodes to catch a jolt from my electrodes. They did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. It caught on in a flash. They did the monster mash. The zombies were having fun. The party had just begun. The guests included Wolfman, Dracula, and his son. The scene was rockin', all were digging the sounds. Igor on chains, backed by his baying hounds. The coffin bangers were about to arrive with their vocal group, the Crypt Kicker 5.
And that was none other than the ghoulish Vincent Price in his 1977 rendition of the Bobby Pickett 1962 classic Monster Mash. Happy Halloween, everybody. Now we'll return to our interview with Jonathan Z. Ludwig.
Senators don't like being told what to do by other senators, other politicians, other people. The White House, I think in this case, the more, Bannon would push and push, the more likely, McConnell is to just ignore them and do what he wants, get through what he wants. Others, however, are standing right by Trump no matter what. John Cornyn was apparently asked about this compromise they're trying to work out in healthcare. And somebody asked about it, and he says, "I support the president's position." When pressed, well, what is the president's position? He shrugged his shoulders and walked away. There's somebody who's just going to blindly follow Trump, I fear. And Ted Cruz, of all people, I think when we talked last year about politics, Ted Cruz was known for trying to simply shut down the Senate, use every Senate rule that he could to just bring everything to a grinding halt. He basically said that people who do that are childish. Everyone needs to sit down and get to work. We have a job to do, right? This is the same Ted Cruz who refused to endorse Trump at the convention, who refused to show up, and who basically told people to vote their consciences, which seemed to be a way of saying it's okay to not vote for Trump, but, vote for me when the time comes. And my own senator here in Oklahoma, when asked about, the Corker statements and, the pending, retirement, as well as Senator Flake's, said, after I saw and witnessed yesterday the overwhelming loud approval and support for the president that we had yesterday at the lunch, I got to thinking, maybe we do better by having some of the people who don't like him leave and replace them with somebody else. And I think that's what's happening. So I think there's a lot of shrugging of shoulders. These people leave, that's fine. We don't care. I don't think they've thought through. They have a 2-seat majority plus a vice president who can break ties. You lose a couple seats and you're going to get nothing done.
If Bannon is hoping to rebuild the GOP in his ideological image, which of course might be a stretch considering what you've said, and that would be as a right-wing political outfit dominated by the cult of Trump, why aren't more traditional Republicans prepared to jump ship? It's not like the Democrats pose that much of a political threat. They are pretty shambolic, rudderless after the Clinton tilt at the presidency last year, and saddled with an aging congressional demographic. And even if the Democratic Party wins the congressional elections next November, would a time out of power give the GOP time to repair some of the damage to its tarnished reputation?
I'm really not convinced that Bannon is trying to create a party as much as he's simply trying to destroy what's there, right? There are people who are incapable of creating everything, right? In business, in government, academia, they simply come in and destroy, leave a mess for somebody else to clean up or pick up. I really get the feeling this is Bannon, right? If you look at him, he looks like he's a disheveled mess. My guess is his life is a disheveled mess. He's trying to make everything around him the same. As far as the Democrats have a 10% generic lead in the polls for generic polling for Congress. But this doesn't mean a whole lot because House seats are individually designed, gerrymandered as it were. Depending on what happens with the Supreme Court ruling, some districts may have to be redrawn. That could throw things a little bit more open, but House seats have almost always been designed to favor the incumbent. The Senate in the next election cycle really has a Republican favorability advantage simply by the number of seats the Democrats have to defend as compared to the Republicans. These would be Democrats that won when Obama won his second term. Some of them were probably coattails people, and a number of them are in states that normally Republicans would win. And again, Indiana, Missouri, and again, it's going to depend who the Republicans nominate for those. As I think I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Democrats could easily win Nevada and Arizona, but lose in West Virginia. This would be, they'd pick up one seat doing this, but there's also Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana up. The Democrats could conceivably lose seats in the Senate elections and have an even bigger minority to deal with. If they do win, it's a double-edged sword for if they do win and they hold the House and the Senate. Yes, they could sit out and rebuild themselves as a party structure. As far as party structures, the Republicans are in much better shape nationally than the Democrats, right? They hold more state houses, they hold more governorships. They've done a much better job of building that grassroots bottom to move people up through the system. The Democrats are still sort of flailing around. They need, if Trump talks about cleaning out the swamp, the Democrats need to clean out their own Aegean stables. Pelosi seems increasingly out of touch every time she speaks. The others look tired. Their party chair doesn't even know the Electoral College is written into the Constitution. They really need fresh ideas, but they also have to be moderate ideas, right? Everyone's going gaga over Senator Harris in California. She's very left-wing as compared, to the more moderates that everybody says that they want. Is that going to be any better? If the Democrats win as far as the Republican Party, then Trump is the sole Republican really with a national voice. And that will probably just, cause the Republican Party to fall apart even more. The question here is, what does Trump really want to have happen? Would he rather cut deals with Democrats? Remember, he had dinner with Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, and the next day Schumer was caught very embarrassingly saying on tape, it was his "he likes me, he really, really likes me" moment. Now, maybe they were just, two sort of scummy New Yorkers cutting deals behind the sides. But the problem is, I don't really know, and I don't know if anybody knows, how wedded Trump is to the Republican Party. Does he care? Does he simply want whatever little coterie of sycophantic worshipers around him, and whatever label it is fine, as long as he can cut deals, do his bidding. But remember, Trump also spent most of his career as a Democrat. He probably, for all we know, the conversations back there was, hey, Trump, you win, you run, we'll help you win, then Hillary will beat you and everybody will be happy. Lo and behold, the great joke on all of us was somehow Trump actually won.
Yeah, that was the joke, wasn't it? Okay, so...
It's Halloween. We can say scary things.
We can't get any scarier than the reality that we currently face. So, Jonathan, is Trump the swamp monster he promised he would be? Has the swamp been drained, tamed, or otherwise contained?
Well, Trump is very much a swamp monster. He's running a swamp that gets deeper and murkier each and every day. It's probably contained in as far as it's not seeping out too far from the usual suspects. We'll see, how far the probe goes. But as far as cleaning it up, no. And I don't think anybody who is a Trump or a Clinton could ever have cleaned it up, right? Their ties, their murky ties, their shadowy connections with each other, with the business world, with the political establishment. But my theory right now is, if the Trumps and the Clintons all end up in prison, let's just go with that John Kasich, John Hickenlooper ticket they were talking about and put them in charge. Kasich is a reasonably spoken governor of Ohio. Hickenlooper, he's a Republican. Hickenlooper's the Democrat. He got to start founding a brew pub in Denver. I think we can all just, sit back, have a beer, and fix the country. But as far as Trump, and the swamp, if he's becoming a scarier monster, it seems like he's becoming more and more unhinged every day, right? Somebody with the gravitas to be president would not be engaging in Twitter wars with senators, with foreign leaders. As much as you might want to knock, mock Kim Jong-un, you probably wouldn't call him Little Rocket Man on the floor of the United Nations. Someone has compared basically that if Nixon had tweeted during the end of his second term, when he was about ready to resign, they would have sounded very much like Trump's tweets today. And if we can segue a little bit, because it is Halloween, to the American author Edgar Allan Poe, I just like to remind our listeners of the story, The Telltale Heart, right? The man who murders, the elderly man, buries him under the floorboards, thinks he's gotten away with it, but he just hears this heart beating louder and louder and louder and louder until, the police who have come to check on these screams that the neighbors heard, won't leave, and finally confesses that he killed him. Why am I hearing this noise? Rogue POTUS staff, the Twitter account, showed up last night and said, you thought you were safe with our silence. Tick-tock, tick-tock. You really have to wonder if, Trump, who clearly knows what went on, whatever went on, knows that they're getting closer and closer, and he's simply becoming more and more divorced from reality, more unhinged. And this, to go back to one of our earlier questions, is why it's important to have people like McMaster and Tillerson and, Mattis around, because he's limited in what he can do to really screw up America, right? It really takes Congress being on board to do that. But a president can seriously damage foreign relations, and this is, I think, where they need to keep him in line.
Well, from our perspective in Australia, we of course are concerned that if Trump's power base does consolidate and Trump maintains his my way or highway style of alliance management till the end of his first term, Canberra, having no other option, will further soften its relationship toward China. Australia, since its federation in 1901, has never been without a great and powerful friend. And with no pro-American regional security architecture in place, and with our follow-the-money approach to business and security, without a more coherent presidency that understands the nuances and importance of maintaining alliance loyalty, which essentially keeps America on top, if we weaken our support for the ANZUS Treaty based on perceived American disinterest, surely that's a strategic victory for China.
In the long run, it probably would be. Presidents have a lot more leeway in foreign policy, but it's also a question of sort of, divorcing the things that he babbles in public and sends out on Twitter. And I know Jeff Flake had some wonderful things to say in his speech about, the inability to communicate on Twitter and things like that. But, you still have Tillerson as Secretary of State. The president's limited in what he can unilaterally do without the support of Congress, especially the Senate, which would originate with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So, the concern may be there, with his talk, but, see what actually happens, behind the scene. How much, he's talked about breaking off from NAFTA. It hasn't happened yet. If anything, my guess is it will somehow be renegotiated, and after, what's it been, about 20 years, things like that probably need to be, relooked at again. As a word of warning to all of you over there, down under, cozying up to China, comes at a great price, right? It limits strategic options, but also it limits, economic and educational options, right? If, China pours in Confucius Institutes, for example, there's certain things you're no longer allowed to teach or talk about at that university. American universities are starting to kick them out. And China will probably insist, either for an absolute alliance or that they just leave China and leave the rest of the world alone. So, you may need to gravitate toward them for other reasons. She, certainly thinks he's a lot more important now. His statements have been codified into, the holy writ of the Chinese Constitution. But the world will be a much different place, I think, if what passed from the UK to America now passes to China. Right, when protection of the seas transferred from the UK to the US, it was a very peaceful, very calm, very safe transition because both really had the same interest in keeping waterways open for international commerce. Will China be interested in that as well, or will China be only, for its Belt and Road Initiative, only its own project, ignore the rest of the world? So I think, with Australia, with New Zealand, with the rest of the world, yes, we're being run by, a scary swamp monster right now. But, China's its own type of monster. And, at the end of the day, America is still America and China is still China. And there should be one side that democracy should want to work with.
Jonathan, I just want to end up with one extra question, and it relates to Crooked Hillary. Now, with all the brouhaha over the swamp monster that sits in the White House currently, we tend to forget that the Democrats have got their own skeletons in the closet, pardon the Halloween pun. And I'm kind of wondering that the more Trump is under pressure, the more likely he's going to be to want to lash out at the Democrats using Crooked Hillary all over again, what Trump thought was a very witty kind of line against her. Is it possible that we may actually start seeing other bits and pieces that we were sort of held back from during the 2016 campaign about Hillary Clinton's own not so kosher form of politics?
Well, some of these comments have already started to come out with the Podesta, with the Podesta revelations coming out over the weekend. The Trump White House, Trump spokespeople have all come out and said, see, look, it wasn't us with the Russians, it was them all along. They're trying to make the case that Hillary paid for that dossier that made Trump really look really bad, with shady things happening in Moscow hotel rooms and things. I think it's still unclear who actually paid for that, whether it was a Republican operative, whether it was the Clintonistas, whether it was the Democratic Party, because I believe one of the banks involved is simply refusing to turn over records. My guess is it's a foreign bank. They're hiding behind their own nation's laws. But this has already started with people basically saying, look, Crooked Hillary, they dealt with the Russians, we're just fine. Ignore the footnote in the Papadopoulos indictment. Ignore all the comments Donald Trump Jr. made about taking meetings. It was really them all along. I imagine that if this keeps going, it will just get sort of more and more vitriolic about the Clintons, because it won't have any effect on Mueller. Mueller will indict as he sees indictments. But Trump needs to keep the Senate and the House in line enough not to impeach him. And to do that, he needs to rally his base. And while parts of his base, as I hear on some of the Sunday morning talk shows and stuff, really wish he would tone down on the tweeting, tone down the comments, the one thing they're unified on is they all really hate Hillary. So if he keeps that up, where no, it's really Hillary, they're going after me, then they're going to rally behind him, and the House and the Senate would be hard-pressed to act or do much of anything.
So it's really a case of one swamp monster nullifying the effects of the other.
I think if the end of the question really is, would it be any different if Hillary were president? I think we'd have an investigation. We'd have an investigation looking into something completely different with indictments to follow. I think the difference would be nobody really be looking at the Trump campaign much, because he was never in politics before. He wouldn't have been afterwards. That would have been purely like a financial investigation that probably would have been handled by the SEC or something. But, there were people this morning posting things like, but her emails, remember her, this whole commentary, it would have been better. It would have been a different type of mess.
Thanks for your insights, Jonathan, and we'll hear from you again next week as Jonathan returns to STRATEGIKON as we explore the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution.
Well, thank you, John. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
This is STRATEGIKON. I'm John Bruni, and that's the show for now. You can subscribe and download STRATEGIKON through iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and TuneIn, as well as from sageinternational.org.au. If you want to know more about Sage International Australia, check out our pages on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and our website, sageinternational.org.au. Until next time, goodbye.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.